Lots of people that can discuss exactly what we mean by millennials. It was a term that was first promulgated by Howe and Strauss a while ago. Roughly, it's people who are, were born between, say, 1980 and the mid to late 90s. So they're people in their 20s and 30s. If you think about those people, though, it's actually kind of remarkable. There are probably some millennials in the room, but these are people for whom Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Deng Xiaoping are mostly people in the history books. Actually, this is probably the last generation that actually went to libraries to look at books. So that's the sorts of folks who are there, mainly because they're also roughly the internet and mobile generation as well. They're right on the cusp, right? When they were born, those things weren't in the in billions of people, they're in the millions of people who had adopted, and now they're in the billions. So it's a really interesting set of folks. So with that, let me invite our panelists to come and join me here, and we'll have a discussion. Again, in a post-fact world, we're actually going to discuss some data. So please come on up. Anywhere you like. Very good. If we could ask each of you to just quickly introduce yourselves. Yeah. John.
So I'm John Ross. I'm the CEO of IGA. We are a retailer operating in multiple countries around the world. We're grocers with about 6,000 stores globally.
Terrific. Mitch.
I'm Mitch Barnes. I'm CEO of Nielsen. As many of you know, I'm sure we're a measurement and analytics company. We work with the media and fast-moving consumer goods industries. We measure what consumers watch and what consumers buy. And we work in 106 countries around the world.
Kevin.
I'm Kevin Lee. I'm the COO of China Youthology. We focus purely on the millennial generation in China. Consumer insights, both qualitative and big data. But today, mostly we're working as an innovation agency on brand strategy and product and service innovation.
Great. So as you can tell, we've taken Ian's advice, and we have terrific people here with a lot of insights. Mitch, why don't we start with you? Again, this is one of the most talked about consumer segments out there. Tell us a little bit about, just at a high level, what are the characteristics people usually associate with millennials? And then when you think about it, we're talking about a very large segment, right? So maybe dig a little bit deeper into, the ways in which that's not, particularly a homogeneous segment either. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, first, what I would say about millennials is it's probably past the time to think of them as a separate and up-and-coming group. I think it was Alan Jope of Unilever who was recently quoted in the Financial Times, said something like, "We don't think of them as a special or different group anymore. They're just the core of our business." And I think that's true for many brands. But at the same time, I think there are a couple of characteristics, at least for me, which are especially noteworthy about millennials. And I'll just touch on them briefly. The first is what I'll call fragmentation, and the second is about trust. The first, fragmentation. With millennials, they essentially live their lives through their mobile phones. And so it's this intense form of hyperconnectivity. And as a result of that, they have access to so much more information than what was true with the previous generation. That increased amount of information leads to a lot more choice. And that increased level of choice leads to fragmentation of how they consume media and also fragmentation in their purchase behavior. With regard to their purchase behavior, what we see with millennials is they are spreading their purchases across a wider range of brands for most product categories out there. And so on the surface, sometimes people interpret that as millennials being less loyal. But I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they're just as loyal, but they just are loyal to more brands. So in other words, they're not promiscuous, they're polygamous. You can think of it that way. And then on fragmentation of media consumption, yeah, of course, less traditional media, 27% less traditional TV in the United States for millennials versus the average adult, a lot more digital media, more mobile, more usage of connected devices. I'm talking about Roku, Apple TV, Google Chromecast, these kinds of devices to access video content. When it comes to news, we did a study for News Corp several years ago, and one of their questions was, will millennials eventually adopt the news consumption habits of their elders. And after a lot of work, we went back to News Corp, Rupert Murdoch and his team, and said, no. In fact, it's the opposite. What is more likely to happen is their elders will eventually adopt the news consumption habits of millennials. And to me, that kind of sums it up pretty well.
John, I'd love to turn to you. Can you talk a little bit about, how you see millennials across different geographic segments and any trends that you might see there? You've talked about some demographic trends, for instance. Yeah.
Well, it is, it's tricky to take an age group and take a homogeneous look at them, especially when their behavior can be so radically different. So you look at millennials in a developed nation like the United States, for example, they are poorer than their parents were at their generation, because the baby boom generation in the United States is healthier longer and staying in the workforce longer, retiring now in their mid-60s or later. Many of the job opportunities aren't there for them, and of course they experienced the housing crisis that was the largest the country had ever seen, and so the competition for housing and their ability to access housing is harder and harder than ever, and then, of course, in many cases, the middle class went to college in greater droves, but they are graduating with the largest student loan debt ever. And so you have a generation which is very powerful and growing very large, but often frustrated at the environment they're in. And then you look at developing nations.
By the way, that's striking and depressing, right? These are people who have worse lives than their parents. Is that basically what you're saying?
Well, we could do a whole panel on the American dream and the challenges for young people in the United States, and there's actually some really positive things for them as well. But if you contrast that with, say, a developing nation, where they are defining the middle class in many instances for these countries, they have higher disposable income than any generation that's come before, and they come in with an optimism and a sense of an expectation for personalization and attention, and perhaps a little bit on celebrity. And I could talk about celebrity too, but they're coming into the environment with a completely different mindset. And then if you look within the countries itself and you break up what does it mean to define a millennial generation today, and then what will it be like for us as a retailer. So as a retailer, I think about not what audience am I serving today, but what will it be like when I'm at the end of my store lease, so 15 or 20 years in the future. And we live in an environment where the millennials are the definition of this new, very powerful generation that's coming forward is not only not homogeneous between different developing or developed nations, but also in ethnicity. And so you look at a nation like the United States, millennials by 2025 will make up 50 to 60, 70% of many of our major metros. And so there's an enormous challenge as a marketer, especially as a retailer, of figuring out how to serve. I spent much of my career working for large big box retailers and nationals and internationals, and in that model in the last 20 or 30 years, our objective was homogeneity. You build a large box, you get a common assortment, you build a supply chain that allows you to go and serve a community, and you build your store in suburbia or in wherever population is going to grow the fastest, and you replicate and go as fast as possible. And so the growth of the population drives comp sales, and you're very successful. This new generation now is coming in with a completely different set of expectations, from everything from media consumption to their expectations of the retail and the service levels, and then their economic prosperity as well. And so their expectations of what's going to happen in retail are going to change. And so looking at it and thinking of it in the same way that we thought of baby boomers or the silent generation before would be a mistake as we go forward.
Kevin, what are you seeing in China?
Well, I mean, I think there have been bits and pieces here. A lot of people ask, is the Chinese consumer different or the same? And the fact is that the Chinese consumer is getting much closer to, I guess, a lot of the other millennials in other markets. What are the things that are the same? Well, all millennials and all young people today are truly in a world of risky society. Right? I mean, we've seen in the headlines in the last number of years, and people are like, we don't know where this world is going. We don't know how things are changing. Well, actually, the Chinese consumer has been in that world for a long time. They have things from the government massively changing policy overnight, and they have to adapt to that. They have the technology that's massively changing. They have income discrepancies, right? Like, if you are a young graduate in China and you try to get a job, if you can get a job, and if you want to buy a home in a large city like Beijing or Shanghai, first of all, the only home you could find might be an hour to 2 hours outside of the city. It might be a tiny shoebox of a place. But the mortgage you would have to take on that home is probably a 100 to 150-year mortgage based on your earning income. So
Can
the
you
income
get a
disparity,
100-year mortgage?
you cannot,
Oh, okay.
right? And so the amazing thing is that a young person in China knows that in junior high school, in primary school, because of social media today, because of what's been shared, they are starting to see a very new reality. Whereas, of course, there's still rapid change and there's still new opportunities, but they're very used to a risky society as well. And so, but the difference is, how do the different millennials around the world deal with that? How are they dealing with the risky society that they have around them? Well, I mean, luckily in China, it's still an amazingly growing place. So many new proliferation of possibilities, especially with social media, that allow for new things to do. And it might be very different in other parts of the world where they might not have the same amount of growth or the same amount of access to possibilities.
So just so we know, we were talking before, these are interesting impressions, but this is based on data. Can you talk a little bit about, where the data comes from? You live in Beijing, for instance. China's a big place. How is it that you know these things, broadly across the country?
Yeah, sure. So for Youthology, we start off qualitatively. Today you've heard a lot about how do you understand and how do you go back to your customer. We don't see the customer. We see a human being. We see an individual. And if you ask any millennial, they will say, I'm not a customer, right? I'm a person, right? I mean, and when you look at the way they consume, how are they consuming today? We talk about fragmentation of media and diversity of loyalty of brands, but really what they're saying is, I'm going to consume what's relevant for me. And what we've seen in the last 10, 15 years is that there has been a reconstruction by the individual of how they're reconstructing what's relevant for them. And that's through social media, from the social world. The way that we do research is we go into their homes, right? We're anthropologists, we're sociologists. We go and follow them in their homes, and in the bars, in the clubs, in their workplace. We try to understand from the shoes that they walk in, how they see themselves, what is their identity, and how are they projecting and perceiving the world around them, and then how are they rebuilding their life based on those understandings.
Very good. Media's come up a few times already, and so Mitch, I'd love to, again, you have a lot of data as well. Can you talk a little bit about, how media consumption amongst, this cohort, what's different and what's unique about it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think you all know this already intuitively, that the millennial generation consumes less traditional media. They consume a lot more media on digital platforms, a lot more through mobile devices as opposed to a PC screen. They have above average use of voice-activated personal assistants. I'm talking about Amazon Echo, Google Home, Google Assistant. One thing I really was struck by was the idea that in terms of news consumption, they say, if I need to know something, it'll find me. I don't need to go look for it. It'll find me in my news feed, on my social media platform. This is a fundamental difference in terms of the way they think about keeping current in the world. They do keep current, but it's a different way of discovering what's relevant. So those are some of the real key differences from a media perspective.
Speaking of media, I'm told that there's a video that can be queued up here. Is that something that we can show? If it isn't, we'll continue our conversation. All right, we'll keep going then. Oh, here we go.
We took a lot of things for granted as baby boomers, where the millennials are a little nervous about their future.
Old and decrepit.
Quite worldly. Well, very worldly.
I think I've grown up in a global village sort of setting, been exposed to a lot of things compared to my parents' time.
60年代的人，下放我们是没干到的，因为我们是60几年的嘛。你像下岗，这都被我们干到了。一胎娘家管父母，这种事情也被我们干到了。然后你青黄不接的时候啊，下岗。
そうお金がないなって思います。バブルとか味わってみたかったなっていう。そういうのを知らなくいいので。
我们这一代人的话，我觉得是被实验的 对象，以80后啊，我来说的话。
I think we'll generally voice our opinions. We won't just say, yes, boss, you're right. But the good, hopefully, we will listen to them because the boss is still a boss.
I think we are all good enough on technology. Whether we could do everything, the next generation will certainly be better, but I would say our generation now is good at technology. Disagree?
Well, look at I'm rubbish.
No, but I think you're good enough and you can do the basics.
I think we are more open to changes. We are more adaptable. We can learn new things.
I feel that the millennials are much more multicultural and accepting of different society members than an old generation.
I feel like our generation or just us, we're computers. Just technology overall. You give a tablet to, your grandma. What is this thing? How do I work this? Do I put on? Is it a frying pan or something? Who knows? But yeah, we're definitely technology savvy for sure.
最普遍的一点，我们的下一代就是比我们有知识、有文化一些，但是对于人情世故来说呢，可能他还没有到这个年龄段。
The world is shrinking, and their perception of the world is expanding. So I think it's a good thing.
I want to say one more thing about it. They can really grow an awesome beard, those millennials. I've never seen such I can't grow that beard. Something happened, all the milk they drank with the hormones, all of a sudden everyone can grow a beard. What the heck? But anyway.
We are worse at just carrying out instructions. We always have our own views to how things should be done.
我们的缺点是吧？我们的缺点的话，我觉得可能没得父辈的那种勤劳感吧。我们会有点懒，我们会有偷懒，我们喜欢做一些小捷径。
I think they're also surprised not getting an immediate answer on something.
どうも見てると非常に苦手な人が多いみたいで、若い極端な例だと若い夫婦で家の中に2人いるのに直接喋らないで LINE 使って会話してるとかっていうのも聞きますから、そこら辺は本当に違うんじゃないかなと。
You'll see millennial couple at a Starbucks, and
they're all on their phones.
Yeah, the couple, one's on one phone, one's on the other. Silence.
That's great. Good.
我那天聊天，我看到笑起来了。我都觉得，我看到一对夫妻坐到那里，这个呢就瞄着手机在那旁边在那爬，那个也在对着爬。我有两个不认得，两个一句话，他的面他嘴巴就接着将他爬。我看他就把个照顾吃完了，吃完了过后一走的，走啊。我一看，搞不了是小两口。
So we've hired people at work, we've hired interns. They come in whenever they want. They think that it's an option to finish work, like to finish their assignment. One time we had these interns that were right out of university, and I gave them a task, and they're like, sorry, we're not going to put a presentation together because that's what we did in school. Like, what?
25 to 35-year-olds are the worst at giving their undivided attention to a face-to-face social situation.
Well, you could just blanket say with undivided attention.
Common sense.
Moving out.
So there's some more qualitative insight. One of my favorite parts about the fact we shoot these as pairs, as watching the other person as one of them is talking. Let's talk about another set of behaviors, though. So John, why don't you, thinking about millennials as shoppers, can you talk a little bit about their behavior there? We talked a little bit about what happens on digital, maybe on mobile as well. But in general, what have you seen?
So you come to conferences like this, and there's all the statistics, the speed with which you see adoption of new technology, and the number of smartphones, and the number of hours spent on the smartphones, and those stats, are awe-inspiring. But they don't really give you a lot of insight into the behaviors that are driving it, and what the expectation coming out of it. And without that insight, it's hard as a retailer to build a campaign or a program in order to serve it. And I think there's kind of two things going on there. So one is all of that technology, unlike, say, if you'd attended a conference 10 years ago and the topic of media would come up, we would have talked about the number of hours that young people spend watching TV. And that was a passive medium in which there's a director and there's a recipient, and we kind of imagined the consumer passively absorbing all this information, including our commercials. But today, all of this technology, Instagram and Snapchat and the mobile device itself, these are interactive and immersive devices. And video games, the video game industry is larger than the movie industry today. And so what we have is an entire generation that has defined and grown up in an environment in which their say matters, in which they're an interactive component and a part of it. And it shows up in really interesting behaviors. So one of them is this idea of celebrity, and I mentioned it before. So I'll tell a quick story. So I was skiing as a college student, and I'm not a particularly great athlete, you can tell by the glasses, but I was skiing and I had a tremendous fall, and I go tumbling down the mountain and I run right into a friend of mine, and I get up and I dust him off and I say, please don't tell anybody. Now imagine that today, what would the millennial say is, I hope somebody got it, right? Did you capture it? Can we post it immediately? And there's this bizarre effect that's happened as we've empowered and wrapped our daily lives with broadcast powerful technology in which you're only one click away from becoming a national or an international star. And this idea that celebrity can be used and harnessed in a marketing standpoint is quite fascinating. So the shopper is saying, I want to be known, I want to be treated uniquely. And it shows up in very specific data. So in our stores, for example, if you ask shoppers to choose between two grocery stores and you control for convenience, what are the top 4 or 5 reasons why you'd go? It's going to be price, it's going to be selection, it's going to be service, it's going to be local, it's all these attributes. But in there is a retailer that knows me, a shop that knows me. And this idea of being known and recognized and appreciated, I think, is linked to this experience and around the technology. And there's another effect that's happening with all of this, and that's a redefinition of the word convenience. So if you grow up in the retail world, especially in the grocery world, we just discuss convenience in terms of speed through lane or in and out through the parking lot quickly. But here's an entire generation that's redefining what food and food consumption and preparation mean. A millennial will spend 50% or more or less time preparing their meal than the previous generation. That's food prep and cleanup. That's 50% less time. And they're 2 to 4x more likely to go out to eat than their parents were. And of course, that varies by market and by country as well. But you combine both of those things, and if you're a terrestrial or bricks and mortar grocer, you have to step back and think about what that really means. So I may have been in the logistics business before, or my responsibility may be in serving healthy and product, but now I have to be aligned with my shopper in order to deliver this at speed. And this concept of speed and celebrity both wrapped together in a fascinating way in which the mobile device is both the way they discover the information, all the way that they feel empowered as a shopper and check out.
Can we pull on that celebrity thread? Are there brands and or retailers who are taking advantage of that trend that you just described?
So I'm a new CEO. I've been on this gig about 8 months. And so you come into a new job and you do a lot of evaluation and listening and trying to understand what your brand does well. Then you put it into comparison with other brands.
Or you try speaking German. It's up to you.
I speak French, not German, but I won't do it live because I won't be as funny. The environment we live in, where the shopper has to define the attribute of the retail that they prefer. So if you say, what are the attributes that drive a global retailer like Tesco? Like, what do they stand for? What are the top 2 attributes they stand for? And you go down that list of convenience and low prices and quality of food and all the rest of this. And then there's this new attribute called personalization. And none of the bricks and mortar retailers scored very well on personalization, at least in the grocery industry. Some of us got better scores than others. And you would think an independent chain, we're made up of independents, where we've been in that marketplace 100 years, we're a venerable chain, we would know our shoppers well, and yet emerging tech startups like Amazon got better scores on understanding and knowing the shopper. But the techniques that they use are really quite simple. So a recommendation that makes a suggestion for what you might do next, or it might be related items that help you make a more complete purchase. I mean, that's not very complicated. That's not the big AI technology or the big, game-changing stuff that we've been talking about on the stage. Those are very simple designs that an associate could do in a store that says, hey, what are you cooking tonight, and have you tried the new whatever? And those are behaviors that if you think about the service levels that we provide in the grocery industry, I'm not sure we're doing a great job. If you look outside the grocery industry, there are other retailers that are doing a spectacular job. And it is a fun thing to imagine if a company like REI or Apple became a grocer. What would that store be like? What's the Genius Bar equivalent inside of a grocery store? And how would we reimagine those service propositions in serving food and health and beauty products? And I think that's the challenge for all of us, is to think through this in this kind of new lens.
Kevin, are you seeing similar trends in the market that you obviously study very deeply?
Well, I want to comment a little bit on the videos that we've been seeing and some of the comments we've been hearing about. By the way, I'm a millennial. I don't know how many of you are out there. But, you know, I mean, like, what do I want to say? I mean, there's a lot of comments about, okay, you know, couples not talking to each other, looking on a phone, just purely on the screens. I mean, if you're not a millennial, you probably have kids that are, and you see the same patterns. But the reality is this. The reality is that this generation and every successive generation afterwards, when we talk about digital native, what we really mean is that they have formed their identity and they have formed their networks, and they have formed their way of life online first and then offline. When we understand digital natives today, and truly we're mobile natives and social media natives today, the ways we interact, it's not influenced by social media, it is formed by social media. We are more comfortable engaging through the new tools that we have, whether it's emoji, right? I mean, like, if you're on WeChat today, there are whole WeChat groups, purely you're not allowed to actually write any words or have any voices, only emoji for everything. That's the entire conversation, just emoji. There was another WeChat group that I saw that's purely, the theme of the WeChat group is caveman sounds. And you communicate with each other purely by caveman sounds. And then it's like as if cavemen were talking to them. I mean, no one knows what anyone else is saying, but that is an expression, right?
That sounds like a vendor negotiation to me.
But what we're seeing here is the interaction and engagement online is so rich that and this generation that has found it to be so rich would prefer to, right, express themselves in a much richer way online, perhaps, than they can even have offline. And now this is just talking about social media, but it extends to all different types of categories, including consumption, right, including how we do retail, right, because they've learned retail online. And I'm not talking about just, you know, JD or Ali. We're talking about in-game purchases. Right, we're talking about virtual reality. We're talking about the ways that they actually consume things. I mean, why? If you're in Singapore today, you'll go outside, you'll see a yellow bike and an orange bike, Ofo and Mobike. Look, those are all Chinese companies, right? There's technology that's enabled us to get on a bike, you know, unlock it, ride somewhere, get off the bike, walk away from it. Don't even have to think about it. Drop it off anywhere. Where did they get that value from? They got it from gaming. Because in gaming, you have this magical bag where you pick up a weapon, you can shoot it, and you can drop it off anywhere, it just disappears. The values that we have online are now, I mean, this is why Tencent and Alibaba are doing so well and rethinking O2O, rethinking truly what is going on offline, because they've learned the new values online, and they are able to replicate, yes, data-driven, yes, technology-driven, but values-driven for a new generation for how they've learned to relive their life online, and now they're hoping to live it offline as well.
So one of the problems is now bikes actually don't disappear. They pile up in these big piles. But help us understand, though, what's the implication for a retailer or a consumer company of, I don't know, the caveman WeChat, right? Or like, do they need to speak emoji in order to communicate with this consumer?
Yeah.
I mean, what does this mean?
I mean, the core thing is this: at the end of the day, it's about relevance. And John mentioned it's about acknowledging, right? Do you recognize me? Do you acknowledge me? I will add to that. The question is not just about relevance or acknowledgement. The question is, who's acknowledging me? Because today in our social media world, the world that millennials grew up in, look, they walk on the street, they don't care who you are, right? You are nobody to them, right? Who do they care about? They care about the people in their network, the people that they have constructed and curated in their social network. When we talk about acknowledgement, if somebody walking across the street says, hey, you're good looking, who cares? I don't care. Why are you talking to me? Right? But if somebody that I do care about in my social network say, hey, this is interesting. Oh, by the way, this is a brand that I like, or this is a product that I found really interesting. Then a young person, a millennial that says, hey, you're in my social circle. I understand you. I understand why you like that. I understand why you've chosen that. Now I understand what that means to me. I understand the relevance. And so going back to retailing, when we're talking about personalization, for example, we need to think beyond just, fit and function of personalization. We need to think about what is the relevance, what is the meaning of this experience related to their actual social world. And so when we talk about data and big data, it's not just about the biometric data, it's really about the social data, understanding where they come from, what social group they're coming from, why they're looking at that product and not that product. What does this product mean in their social group and not that product? And as retailers, we need to think that way.
Super.
And just to build on that, in the US over the past 5 years, we've seen a share shift in the marketplace. 3 points of share from big brands moving down to small brands. And part of it is what I referenced earlier, which is fragmentation of purchases and people spreading their purchases across more brands, millennials in particular, going more for local and specialty products and things like that. But another big factor harkens back to what Jonathan said, which is the issue of trust. Millennials, in our experience, don't extend trust as readily as the previous generation. The data I've seen, 19% of millennials trust big institutions. That means big corporations, it means government, and it also means big mass brands. And so the big mass brands don't have the same advantage as they used to, and therefore the smaller brands are actually more on trend and they have less of a barrier to get over. And if they're relevant, if they align with the millennials' values, if they're a brand that stands for meaning and purpose, then they have a big leg up. And it's been a really interesting dynamic. And it's one that we continue to see this trend build. It has not flattened off at all yet.
All right, panelists, it's time for the dreaded lightning round. Are you ready? Quick questions, quick answers. Here we go. Number one, what's the most surprising thing about millennials that people might not know about? John.
Fear. The internet has wrapped them with all this information, which should make them more confident, but it also allows them to see all the pitfalls of everything coming on, and they walk into the store and walk out worried about so much nutrition and all this other information in which they increasingly do not feel they're as smart as they need to be.
Mitch.
That they're not less loyal, that they are equally loyal, but they're just loyal to more brands.
Kevin.
Yeah, I would say that the most important thing about a millennial is about their perspective. They are very into their own perspective, and that's the thing that defines them, how they can add their perspective to anything in the world.
All right, in which country is the millennial cohort the most different from other countries? Kevin. In which country is the millennial cohort most different from those in other countries?
I have no way to answer that. I only know one millennial, which is the China one.
Mitch.
I'm going with China as well.
John.
I'll go with China.
For what product category, which product category has the most implications for millennials? John.
Fresh, produce, meat. It's the most diverse and it's the most complicated to get right, but if you do, they love you for it.
Mitch.
I'll go with beer because it's a way to express individuality and sophistication.
Kevin.
Yeah, I'll go with fresh. We talked about fast and convenient, but actually there's both sides. There are times when you need to be fast and convenient, and there's times to slow down and enjoy something, and young people are able to define what time is for what.
Beer was a great answer.
Wait. So some of their own feelings here. Which company is addressing the millennial segment most effectively? Kevin.
Millennials, say it again.
Which company is addressing the segment most effectively?
That's easy. That's Tencent and Alibaba for sure. Yeah, I mean, they're built with young people. They know young people on the data, and they're willing to learn, and they're creating new things all the time with young people.
Mitch.
I have to agree. Tencent. I used to live in China, so I'm not just following his answer.
I'd go with Apple. I mean, the devices, they've defined the interaction, the smartphone in a way that's spread to other technology companies, but also our definition of retail. One of the most powerful retailers imaginable. I'll go with Apple.
What's the greatest unmet need for millennials? John.
I'll go back with my celebrity answer. They live in an environment where they need constant attention and reinforcement, and whoever gives it to them is going to earn their loyalty.
Mitch.
Being trustworthy, because while they're less trusting, it's more important to them, and so they'll reward a brand that they can trust.
Kevin.
Simply empathy. You know, they're fine with you having SKUs and a brand portfolio for other people, but do you have one product that you've really thought about them for?
Kevin, what's your favorite source of data about millennials?
Primary data, really being with millennials every day.
Mitch.
You mean other than data from Nielsen, I guess.
It's a homer.
I'm going Nielsen.
All right.
These Nielsen guys are pretty good.
Very good. And finally, just stealing another question, what one piece of advice do you have for people in the room for addressing the millennial segment? John?
I think it's too easy to be judgmental. I think that the video is funny in some ways, but our real obligation is to listen to what's going on, understand their challenges, and whether it's celebrity or whether it's their need for validation or how complex their lives are, and to serve them right.
Mitch?
It's not a separate group. It's not the up-and-coming group. It's probably the core of your consumer segment.
Kevin?
You know, today and yesterday we heard a lot about the data of the consumer and tracking the data and, you know, using the data. A lot of that data is current and historical. Yesterday we heard from Grab about not just using data but also using intuition. Today the young person is highly intuitive themselves, they're highly creative themselves, and they're creating their own lives. And one of the things that we don't hear about but we should be really talking about is not just about tracking what they've done and tracking where they are from their current behaviors, but about working with them because they're absolutely creative people and collaborating and co-creating with them as they're creating their own future.
All right, please thank our panel. So we're going to go to break now, and thank you to Ajinomoto as well as Lotus for sponsoring it. And also, please do go to the iTalks in the iPass Center. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.